My husband found out I was pregnant and that same night threw me out of the house. But a lawyer called me. Your first husband from 2015 left you a fortune of $91 million, but there is one condition that... Good day, dear listeners. It's Briella again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Sarah Collins, and for a long time I believed I was one of the lucky ones. I grew up in Charlottesville, Virginia, in a house that always smelled like my mother's banana bread and old paperback novels. We weren't wealthy, but we were steady. My father worked in insurance, my mother taught third grade, and I learned early that reliability was its own kind of love. I carried that lesson into adulthood like a pressed flower between the pages of a book, fragile but preserved. My first marriage to James Whitfield lasted 4 years. James was a quiet man, an architect from Connecticut who loved jazz and morning runs and speaking in complete sentences. We were happy in the uncomplicated way that people are happy when they aren't yet tested. Then, in the spring of 2014, James was diagnosed with an aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. He died 11 months later, in March of 2015, at the age of 41. I was 31. I held his hand when he went. I didn't cry until I was in the parking lot of the hospital, alone, leaning against my car in the cold Virginia air. Grief does strange things to a person's judgment. I know that now. I knew it then, too. I just chose not to listen. I met Derek Hale at a fundraiser for the Charlottesville Arts Center in October of 2016. He was tall, with dark hair going silver at the temples and a laugh that filled a room without trying. He was a commercial real estate developer, successful, charming, socially fluent in the way that certain men learn to be when they want something. I told myself his attention felt like sunlight after a very long winter. What I didn't ask myself was why a man like that was so immediately, so intensely focused on me. We dated for 8 months. He was attentive in ways James had never been. Grand gestures, weekend trips, flowers that arrived without occasion. Looking back, I can identify the pattern. The accelerated intimacy, the subtle isolation, the way he would occasionally say something cutting and then smooth it over so quickly, I almost doubted I'd heard it. Almost. We married in June of 2017. A small ceremony in the Blue Ridge Mountains, 30 guests, late afternoon light. His mother, Linda Hale, sat in the front row wearing ivory. A choice I registered but said nothing about. She kissed my cheek at the reception and told me I was a charming addition to the family. Not welcome. Addition. The first 3 years of our marriage were manageable. We lived in Derek's house, a large renovated colonial in the Belmont neighborhood that was always referred to as his house, never ours. I worked as a hospital administrator. I paid my half of household expenses. I cooked 4 nights a week. I attended every one of Derek's business dinners and smiled at clients whose names I had memorized from a list he texted me beforehand. The warning signs accumulated slowly, the way water damage does, invisible until the ceiling falls. He began checking my phone in year 2. Not aggressively, just casually, the way a person picks up an object on a table. When I mentioned it, he said he wasn't snooping, he was just curious. He started commenting on how much time I spent with my friend Maggie. She was too opinionated. She didn't respect our marriage. He once came home from a business trip and walked through the house inspecting surfaces for dust. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me. That look said everything. By 2020, I had stopped arguing back, not because I agreed with him, but because I had learned with the precision of a scientist, exactly which behaviors kept the household calm and which ones ignited something I didn't want to see. And still, God help me, I loved him. Or I loved the version of him I had decided was real. People do that. They fall in love with potential and then spend years quietly grieving its absence. I found out I was pregnant on a Thursday in February of 2023, 8 weeks along. I sat on the bathroom floor for 20 minutes with the test in my hand, and what I felt wasn't dread. It was, heartbreakingly, joy. A fragile, desperate joy. I thought a baby might change something. I thought it might crack open whatever had calcified between us. I was wrong. I told Derek that evening after dinner. I had set the table with candles. I had made his favorite. Lamb chops with rosemary, a bottle of Cabernet from the rack he kept in the dining room. I thought ambiance might soften things. I told him carefully, watching his face. He set down his fork. The silence that followed was not the silence of surprise. It was calculated, cold. He looked at me the way a person looks at a legal document they've just found an error in. "Whose is it?" he asked. I didn't answer right away because I was certain I had misheard him. "Derek, I want you out of this house tonight," he said. "Pack what fits in one bag. The rest can be arranged later." I asked him if he was serious. He stood up, walked to the front door, and opened it. He stood there, holding it open, not looking at me, as though I were a guest who had overstayed a welcome I'd never actually been given. I packed a bag in 11 minutes. I know because I counted. It was the only way I could keep from shaking apart. I walked past him without speaking. He closed the door behind me before I reached my car. It was February. It was 38 degrees. I sat in my car in the dark and thought, what just happened to me? I didn't have an answer yet, but I was going to find one. I drove to Maggie's house that night because I had nowhere else to go. Maggie Ortiz had been my closest friend since graduate school. She was a paralegal with a sharp mind and a shorter temper than me, which had always been a source of both friction and comfort. She opened her door at 11:15 at night, took one look at me standing on her porch with a duffel bag and no coat, and said, "Get inside. I'm making tea, and you're going to tell me everything." So I did. I sat at her kitchen table until 2 in the morning, and I talked. I told her about the dinner, about the fork, about the door held open like an eviction. Saying it out loud made it real in a way I hadn't been ready for. I had to stop twice. Maggie didn't interrupt. She refilled my tea and listened with the focused stillness of someone who was already in the back of her mind, compiling information. When I finished, she said, "He asked whose it was." "Yes, Sarah." She looked at me steadily. "That's not a question a surprised man asks. That's a question a man asks when he's been waiting for an excuse." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in Maggie's guest room staring at the ceiling, cataloging everything I stood to lose. The house, which was legally his, purchased before our marriage with no prenuptial agreement that covered my contributions to its upkeep. My clothing, my books, the photograph of James that I kept on the nightstand, my financial stability. We had maintained separate accounts at Derek's insistence from the start of our marriage, but the household bills, the groceries, the incremental erosions of daily life had been largely absorbed by my salary. I had approximately $11,000 in my personal savings. I was 8 weeks pregnant. I was 39 years old. The arithmetic was not encouraging. The following morning, I called in sick to work for only the second time in 4 years, and I allowed myself 6 hours of collapse. I cried. I ate crackers because my stomach was in revolt. I sat on Maggie's back porch in her oversized cardigan and watched a squirrel excavate something from her garden bed and thought about how strange it was that the world continued at its usual pace when yours had just stopped. Then, at 2:17 in the afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID said, "Whitfield and Crane Attorneys at Law." I almost didn't answer. I thought it was spam. But something made me pick up, some instinct I couldn't name. The voice on the other end was careful and professional. "May I speak with Sarah Collins, formerly Sarah Whitfield?" "This is she," I said. "Mrs. Collins, my name is Gerald Crane. I'm a senior partner at Whitfield and Crane in Richmond. I represent the estate of James Whitfield. I've been attempting to reach you for several months. It appears your address has changed." I sat up straighter. "What is this about?" "Mrs. Collins, I'll be direct with you. James Whitfield amended his will in December of 2014, several months before his death. He established a trust in your name and designated you as the sole beneficiary of his estate, which has been held and invested since his passing in 2015. The current value of the trust is approximately $91 million. The words reached me in pieces, like a sentence spoken underwater. I stopped. "That's not possible. James wasn't wealthy." "He was," Mr. Crane said quietly. "He was quite private about it. His grandfather's estate, combined with returns on several long-term investments, has grown considerably over the past 8 years. James was specific in his wishes." Why am I only hearing about this now? "You moved twice after his death and were, for a period, unreachable through our previous contact information. We located you through your professional license registration." A pause. "Mrs. Collins, there is a condition attached to the inheritance. James stipulated that the funds be released only once you had demonstrated, to the satisfaction of the trustee, that you were not in a marriage or partnership that was," and I'm quoting his language directly, "financially or emotionally exploitative in nature. He wanted to be sure you were free." I sat on Maggie's porch in the cold February air, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness, not yet. Something older and quieter than that. James had seen something I hadn't, and he had reached forward across 8 years of death and tried to protect me. "How is that condition assessed?" I asked. "We work with an independent evaluator, a licensed family law attorney, and a financial forensic specialist. They review documentation, conduct interviews. The process takes approximately 60 days. But Mrs. Collins, given what appears to be your current situation—" He paused with the delicacy of someone choosing their words very precisely. "I would strongly encourage you to begin that process as soon as possible." I thanked him. I hung up. I held the phone in my lap and looked at the squirrel, which had found whatever it was looking for and was now sitting very still, holding it. James. Even gone, he was trying to take care of me. I went back inside. I found Maggie in the kitchen. I told her everything: the call, the trust, the condition, the $91 million. I watched her expression move through disbelief, then recognition, then something approaching controlled fury on my behalf. "Okay," she said when I finished. "Here's what you're going to do." That was the moment my plan began. The first step was documentation. I needed to establish in writing the facts of what Derek had done: the expulsion from the home, the pregnancy, the accusation. Maggie, with her paralegal's precision, helped me draft a detailed written account that evening, time-stamped and witnessed by her signature. We included the date, the conversation, his exact words, the temperature outside. The second step was legal counsel. I needed my own attorney, not the estate's evaluator, but someone who could represent my interests in both the inheritance proceedings and any potential divorce action. Maggie had a colleague, a family law attorney named Patricia Osei, who had a reputation in Richmond for being methodical, unshakable, and utterly without sentimentality. I called Patricia's office first thing the next morning and made an appointment for the following Tuesday. The third step, and this was the one that felt both most rational and most frightening, was to do nothing that would alert Derek to what was coming. He had made his move. Now I had to make mine, quietly, carefully, in a way he wouldn't see until it was too late. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt the specific clarity that arrives when you have no choice but to be brave. I was 8 weeks pregnant, alone, and sitting on the edge of $91 million. And Derek Hale had just made the worst mistake of his life. Patricia Osei's office was on the 4th floor of a building on West Broad Street in Richmond. Clean lines, no clutter, a single orchid on the windowsill that looked like it had never once been neglected. Patricia herself matched the room. She was a small woman in her mid-50s, with natural hair cropped close and reading glasses that she removed when she wanted to make a point and replaced when she was done making it. She shook my hand once, firmly, and gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Tell me everything," she said. "Don't edit." So I didn't. I told her about the marriage, the warning signs I had cataloged and ignored, the dinner, the door, the 38 degrees. I told her about James's estate, the call from Gerald Crane, the condition attached to the trust. I laid it out in the order it happened, without drama, because Patricia struck me as a woman who had no patience for drama and considerable respect for sequence. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, turning her pen slowly in her fingers. "The condition James attached to the trust," she said finally. "That's unusual, but it's legally defensible. Testamentary conditions are enforceable as long as they don't violate public policy. A condition requiring the beneficiary to not be in an exploitative relationship, that's subjective, but the evidentiary standard is manageable. We document the exploitation. We demonstrate the pattern. We present it to the trustee. And the divorce? Virginia is an equitable distribution state. You've been married 6 years. You have no prenuptial agreement that would exclude your contributions to the marital household. You may have a claim to a portion of assets acquired during the marriage, even if title is in his name." She looked at me steadily. "But I want to be honest with you, Sarah. Derek Hale has financial resources and, I would assume, his own legal representation. This will not be fast." "I'm not in a hurry," I said. "I'm in a position." She looked at me for a moment. Then she put her glasses back on. "Good answer." We filed the initial separation paperwork that week. Patricia sent a formal letter to Derek's address confirming my representation and requesting the return of my personal belongings. She also, with quiet precision, began the process of subpoenaing financial records, bank statements, business filings, anything that would document the economic landscape of our marriage. I returned to my job. I moved through the hospital corridors with the same measured efficiency I always had, but something inside me had shifted. Some internal gyroscope had recalibrated. I was no longer drifting. I had coordinates. It was during the second week of March that Maggie called me at lunch. "He's been asking around," she said without preamble. "What do you mean?" "I ran into Claire Hendricks at the gym this morning. You know Claire, she's in that neighborhood association with Linda Hale. She said Linda has been making calls, asking people if they've seen you, if you've said anything. She's using the word unstable I pressed my phone against my ear. Unstable. That's the word she's using. That you had some kind of breakdown. That the pregnancy might not be... Maggie paused. She's suggesting the baby might not be Derek's. The audacity of it was almost impressive. Linda Hale had decided that the best defense was a preemptive narrative. Establish me as a liar and a cheat before I could establish anything about her son. They know something is happening, I said. They know enough to be scared, Maggie said, which means you're doing something right. The concrete evidence arrived 9 days later, and it arrived in a form I hadn't anticipated. Patricia called me on a Thursday afternoon with a particular quality of stillness in her voice that I had come to recognize as the sound she made when something significant had landed on her desk. "The Financial Forensic Review has turned up something," she said. "Are you somewhere you can talk?" I stepped into an empty conference room and closed the door. "Derek has a second LLC," Patricia said. "It was registered in Delaware in 2018, a year after your marriage. It's a shell company, Sarah. For the past 4 years, he has been moving money through it, roughly $2 million in total, drawn from accounts that, under Virginia law, would constitute marital assets." I sat down. "He's been hiding money," I said, "systematically. And there's more. The LLC has a registered agent, a woman named Tara Simmons, based in Northern Virginia. We've pulled her public records." Patricia paused with that same careful stillness. "She and Derek have been in a relationship for approximately 3 years. She's listed as a co-director of 2 of his business entities." The room was very quiet. 3 years. He had been conducting a parallel life for 3 years. He had sat across from me at dinner tables and attended my colleagues' retirement parties, and slept beside me and built an entire separate existence with another woman. And when I told him I was pregnant, his instinct hadn't been guilt. It had been calculation. He had opened the door not out of anger, but out of strategy. He wanted me gone before any of this could surface. I thought about James, who had loved me simply and completely, and had still, even in dying, been thinking about my future. Then I thought about Derek, who had looked at me the way you look at a problem you've finally found a solution to. "Patricia," I said when I trusted my voice again, "what do we do with this?" "We document everything," she said. "Certified copies, chain of custody, notarized affidavits. And then, Sarah, then we use it." This was the point of no return, not the night he pushed me out into the cold, not the phone call from Gerald Crane. This moment, sitting in a beige conference room on the 4th floor of a Richmond office building, listening to the measured voice of a woman who had just handed me the key to my own case. This was where the story truly turned. I had gone looking for my footing. I had found, instead, the ground itself. The estate evaluation meeting took place on a Friday morning in mid-March in the offices of Whitfield and Crane on West Carey Street. Gerald Crane was a tall man in his late 60s with the careful bearing of someone who had spent decades navigating other people's grief. He introduced me to the independent evaluator, a woman named Dr. Renee Barlow, a licensed family law attorney and certified financial forensic examiner who wore no jewelry and took notes in a shorthand I couldn't decipher. She shook my hand with the business-like warmth of someone who had seen a great deal of human pain and had learned to honor it without being subsumed by it. I had prepared for 2 weeks. Patricia and I had assembled a binder, organized, indexed, meticulous, that documented the arc of my marriage to Derek Hale. Financial records showing my contributions to household expenses against his progressive withdrawal of shared resources. Texts in which he dismissed, demeaned, or gaslit me, retrieved from my old phone backup. A log I had maintained, quietly in a notes app for the last 2 years, of incidents that had disturbed me. The recorded testimony of 2 colleagues who had witnessed his behavior at a company event in 2021, and the forensic financial report with its careful, damning documentation of the Delaware LLC and Tara Simmons. Dr. Barlow reviewed the binder over the course of the morning. She asked questions in the methodical way that good evaluators do, not to challenge but to clarify. She asked about the night of the expulsion. She asked whether I had sought medical care during the pregnancy. She asked how I would characterize the power dynamic in my marriage over the preceding 3 years. I answered everything. I didn't perform. I simply told the truth, which, assembled in sequence, was more damning than anything I could have dramatized. At noon, Gerald Crane leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Collins," he said, "based on the documentation provided and this morning's evaluation, I'm prepared to advance the trustees' review to final determination. Barring any significant countervailing evidence, we expect to conclude within 30 days. 30 days. I nodded. I thanked them both and walked to my car in the pale March sun, and I sat for a moment with my hands in my lap, breathing. James. I thought his name the way you think a prayer. Then my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered. Sarah. It was Linda Hale. Her voice was composed in that particular way that very controlled people sound when they are, in fact, not composed at all. I think it's time we talked. I'm represented by counsel, I said. You should know that. This isn't a legal conversation. This is a family conversation. A pause, perfectly weighted. I know you've been making inquiries. I know you've spoken to lawyers. I think you're making a very serious mistake. And I think, given everything Derek has done for you over the past 6 years, you owe it to this family to have a conversation before things become, another pause, complicated. Complicated for whom? I asked. Silence. I'll have my attorney contact yours, I said, and hung up. The escalation came within 48 hours. A process server appeared at Maggie's door on a Sunday afternoon with a filing. Derek had retained a divorce attorney and counterfiled, claiming the marriage had broken down due to my emotional instability and refusal to maintain marital commitments. He was contesting equitable distribution on the grounds that I had contributed minimally to the marital household. He was also, and this part made Patricia go very still when she read it, seeking a court order to compel paternity testing before I could make any claims related to the pregnancy. He's trying to delegitimize you on every front simultaneously, Patricia said. The narrative he's building is that you're unstable, unfaithful, and financially parasitic. He wants the court to see you as a liability, not a victim. Can he get the paternity order? He can request it. It won't be granted without more cause than he's demonstrated, and the timing, making this demand the moment you've initiated proceedings, will not reflect well on him. But Sarah, I want you to understand something. She looked at me directly. He knows about the estate. Somehow he knows. That landed like a stone in still water. I thought about who could have connected the dots. Gerald Crane's office had been discreet, but legal filings leave traces, and Derek had his own financial investigators. It didn't matter how he'd found out. What mattered was that he had, and that his strategy was now fully visible. Destroy my credibility, challenge the legitimacy of my child, and undermine the estate condition by painting me as the kind of woman James's trust was designed to protect against. It was elegant in its malice. I almost admired it. Patricia filed our response within the week. point by point, document by document, with the forensic evidence of the Delaware LLC and Tara Simmons as the centerpiece. We did not editorialize. We simply presented what was true and let it stand. 3 days later, Derek's attorney sent a terse letter requesting an extension of the discovery timeline. They were regrouping, buying time. It meant the evidence had landed exactly where we intended. That weekend, I drove to my parents' house in Charlottesville. My mother made soup. My father sat beside me on the porch and didn't ask me to explain anything I wasn't ready to explain. I slept 9 hours on Friday night and 8 on Saturday, and on Sunday morning I sat in the garden with a cup of decaf and felt for the first time in weeks something approaching stillness. I was not naive. I knew harder days were coming, but I had learned, somewhere in the past month, that I was more capable of standing in difficulty than I had ever allowed myself to believe. I drove back to Richmond on Sunday evening with clean clothes and a clear head. I was ready. The offer arrived on a Tuesday, 12 days after Patricia had filed our evidentiary response. It came not through legal channels, but through my sister-in-law, Derek's younger sister, Candace, which told me immediately that it was designed to feel personal rather than transactional. Candace and I had always maintained a careful, cordial distance. She was not unkind. She simply orbited her mother's gravity without questioning it. She texted me asking if we could meet for coffee. I consulted Patricia, who said I was under no obligation to meet with anyone from Derek's family, but that refusing could later be characterized as unwillingness to communicate. So I agreed. A public place. 1 hour, my terms. We met at a cafe on Grove Avenue on a Wednesday morning. Candace arrived first. She looked tired and faintly embarrassed, which I took as a sign that she had not entirely volunteered for this assignment. She ordered a latte and got to the point faster than I expected. "Derek wants to offer you a settlement." "He has an attorney for that," I said. "He doesn't want it to go through attorneys." She looked at her cup. "He's willing to give you the house, full title transfer, plus $200,000 lump sum as he called it a goodwill gesture." She said those last words with a faint involuntary wince, as though she recognized how they sounded, in exchange for withdrawing the divorce filings and not pursuing the estate proceedings. I looked at her for a moment. The house, $200,000, and silence. He had done the math. He had figured out that $91 million, even half of it accessible to me, dwarfed anything a Virginia equitable distribution ruling might yield. He wanted me to take the smaller amount, feel grateful, and disappear. And he wanted me to disappear in a way that would leave his hidden assets, his LLC, his relationship with Tara Simmons, his 4 years of financial fraud, permanently buried. "Candace," I said carefully, "I want you to understand that I bear you no ill will. I know you're here because your family asked you to be, and I know that's uncomfortable." I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. "But I won't be accepting that offer." She looked at me. "Sarah, I think you should consider—" "I have considered," I said. "Tell Derek to speak to my attorney." She left before her latte was finished. I stayed and drank my tea and watched the street outside, where the first green things were beginning to show on the trees. So early you could almost miss them if you weren't paying the right kind of attention. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. There's a difference. That evening, Maggie organized something I hadn't asked for and didn't know I needed. She called it dinner, but what it actually was, I understood only when I arrived at her house and found 7 women sitting around her dining room table. Maggie herself, 2 colleagues from the hospital who had known me for years, my neighbor Donna, who was a retired social worker, Patricia Osei, who appeared to have been specifically invited to be herself rather than my attorney, a woman named Rosa from my prenatal yoga class, and my childhood friend Beth, who had driven 2 hours from Roanoke without being asked twice. There was no formal agenda. Maggie had made a vast quantity of food, and there was sparkling water and tea, and people talked about their own lives, their own moments of being left standing in the cold, about what it meant to start over, about babies and money, and the kind of courage that doesn't feel like courage from the inside. At one point, Donna leaned across the table and said, "Sarah, you know what I noticed about you tonight? You're not asking for permission. You used to do that. Ask permission to have your own feelings. You're not doing it anymore." I thought about that on the drive home. She was right. Something had changed in me. Not hardened exactly, but settled. I had spent 6 years asking Derek's emotional permission to take up space. I wasn't doing that anymore. Patricia walked out with me to the parking lot and touched my arm briefly. "The trustee's office called this afternoon," she said. "Dr. Barlow has submitted her preliminary recommendation. It's favorable." I nodded. 30 days, Sarah," she said. "Maybe less." I drove home through the quiet streets of Richmond, past houses with lit windows and families inside doing ordinary things. I thought about James and about the baby growing steady and stubborn inside me, and about the fact that for the first time in a very long time, I was not afraid of what came next. Derek and Linda were watching. I knew that. I could feel it. The surveillance of people who have made a move and are waiting to see the effect. Let them watch. I had nothing to hide. They came on a Saturday morning, which was deliberate. Weekends have a domestic quality that weekdays don't. A softness, a vulnerability. The choice of Saturday told me everything about their strategy before they said a single word. They arrived at Maggie's door at 10:15, and the audacity of simply appearing, without invitation, without prior notice, was so characteristic of Linda that I almost had to admire its consistency. Maggie answered the door, looked at them, and turned without speaking to find me in the kitchen. "They're here," she said with a flatness that communicated everything. I set down my mug. I smoothed my sweater. I went to the door. Linda was dressed in a camel coat and pearl earrings, put together in the particular way of women who understand that presentation is a form of argument. Derek stood slightly behind her, which struck me immediately as a reversal of the dynamic he usually performed. He looked, if I was being honest, less certain than I'd ever seen him. The hand holding his car keys was moving slightly, a micro-rhythm of tension. "Sarah," Linda said with a warmth so practiced it had the texture of a stage prop. "We came because we were worried about you, about the baby." She glanced down at my midsection with an expression designed to read as maternal concern. This whole situation has become so adversarial, and that can't be good for anyone, least of all a pregnant woman. We thought perhaps we could just talk. As family. Family. The word landed in the space between us with considerable irony. I did not invite them inside. I stood in the doorway with one hand on the doorframe. "I'm fine," I said. "My attorney handles my communications with Derek's side." "This isn't about attorneys." Linda's voice shifted, just slightly, just enough that a person paying close attention would catch the gear change. "This is about what's best for the child, our grandchild." Another pause. This one weighted with something sharper beneath the softness. "James Whitfield was a good man, but Sarah, that money was meant for a version of your life that doesn't exist anymore. You've moved on. You built a life with our son. Don't let a dead man's nostalgia derail everything you have." there it was, a dead man's nostalgia. James, who had spent his final months of life thinking carefully about my future, who had constructed a legal instrument of extraordinary precision and foresight, reduced to sentiment, to an inconvenience. I looked at Linda for a moment without speaking. Then I looked at Derek. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't fully decode, something between calculation and something that might have been, buried very deep, shame. "Derek," I said, "you asked me whose baby this was. You opened the front door and waited for me to leave. You did that the night I told you I was pregnant." I kept my voice level. "I want you to look at me and tell me that was a man who was invested in my well-being." He said nothing. I didn't think so. I returned my gaze to Linda. "I understand what you're doing here. You want me to feel like the problem, like the disruptive element in an otherwise functional situation. You want me to feel guilty enough about James's money to walk away from it and grateful enough for your son's occasional decency to pretend the last 6 years were something other than what they were." I tilted my head slightly. "I'm not going to do that." Linda's composed expression didn't shatter. It shifted, a subtle, cold reorganization of her features into something she didn't bother to dress up anymore. "You're making an enemy you don't need, Sarah." "I already have the enemies I have," I said. "That's not new information." She looked at me for a long moment, and then she turned and walked back toward the car. Derek followed. He always followed. But at the bottom of Maggie's porch steps, he paused and looked back at me over his shoulder. His expression was strange, complex, not threatening exactly, more like a man watching something he understood, too late, that he had miscalculated. I went inside. Maggie was standing in the hallway. "You okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said. And then, because I believed in telling the truth even when it was complicated, mostly, because there was fear, I would not pretend otherwise. Linda's final line, "You're making an enemy you don't need," had a specific texture that wasn't quite threat and wasn't quite warning. It was the kind of thing said by someone who has resources you haven't yet fully mapped and the willingness to use them. But here's what I learned that morning, standing in the doorway of my friend's house with one hand on the frame. Fear, properly understood, is not a sign of weakness. It is the body's honest recognition of real stakes. And real stakes, honestly faced, are not a reason to retreat. They are a reason to be more careful, more precise, more certain of the ground you're standing on. I went back to the kitchen. I picked up my mug. The tea was cold now, but I drank it anyway. I had 23 days until the trustees' final determination. I had not come this far to stop now. The final hearing before the trustees' board took place on a Thursday morning in late April in the formal conference room of Whitfield and Crane. It was not technically a court proceeding. The estate trust operated under private fiduciary law, and the determinations were made by the trustees themselves, with findings that were legally binding but conducted without the theatrical architecture of a courtroom. What it was, in practice, was a structured proceeding with all the weight of one. Gerald Crane presided. Dr. Renee Barlow was present. Patricia Osey sat beside me, her notepad open, her reading glasses in her hand. Across the table, I had not expected to see Derek. The process technically allowed for the opposing spouse to submit a rebuttal testimony. His attorney had filed notice 48 hours prior. He arrived with a man I didn't recognize, presumably his own counsel. Linda was not present, which surprised me briefly and then didn't. Linda operated best from a position of plausible deniability. Derek looked like he had not been sleeping well. Gerald Crane opened the proceedings with the formal recitation of purpose, the trust, James's stipulations, the evaluative criteria, the documentation already submitted. He spoke with the precision of someone who found comfort in procedural exactness. Then he invited Dr. Barlow to summarize her findings. She did so without editorializing, which made it more devastating. She described the pattern of financial control in the marriage, documented income disparity, asymmetrical access to household accounts, and Derek's exclusive management of shared financial decisions. She described the coercive elements of the relationship, citing specific incidents from the log I had maintained and corroborated by witness accounts. She presented the night of February's expulsion as a case study in the kind of acute, destabilizing behavior James's trust condition had been designed to identify. And then she laid out the Delaware LLC. The room changed quality when she did. Derek's attorney leaned toward him and whispered something. Derek's expression went very controlled. Too controlled, the kind of control that is itself a signal. The forensic financial analysis, Dr. Barlow said, in the same level tone she had used throughout, indicates that approximately $2 million in assets originating from joint marital income were systematically transferred to a Delaware-registered shell company over a period of 4 years. The company lists as co-director one Tara Simmons, with whom Mr. Hale has maintained a documented personal and professional relationship for approximately 3 years. Derek's attorney stood up. I'd like to object to the characterization of, "This is not a court proceeding," Gerald Crane said, with a mildness that cut cleanly. "Please be seated." The attorney sat. Crane turned to Derek. "Mr. Hale, you have submitted a rebuttal statement. Would you like to speak to the findings presented?" And this is where it fell apart. Not dramatically. Not in the way of movie scenes where someone pounds a table and screams a confession. It fell apart the way that badly constructed things fall apart, slowly at first, then all at once, because the weight of accumulated contradiction finally exceeded what the structure could hold. Derek began by questioning the forensic methodology. Then, pivoting, visibly recalibrating, he tried to reframe the Delaware LLC as a protective business vehicle for marital assets established to guard their shared financial future. He said this with a straightness that required, I thought, a certain specialized courage. Patricia had anticipated this and had submitted a document cross-referencing every transaction from the LLC account against our household financial records. None of the funds had ever re-entered accounts accessible to me, not $1. Derek then said that James's trust condition was constitutionally ambiguous and reflected the biases of a jealous ex-husband. He used those words. Jealous ex-husband. In a room where the man's own estate attorney was sitting 6 feet away. Gerald Crane's expression didn't change, but something around his eyes did. Then Derek made the error that I think he would, in later months, understand was the catastrophic one. Perhaps out of desperation, perhaps out of a genuine belief that it would work, he looked across the table at me and said, "Sarah, this doesn't have to go this way. You know that. We can still—" "Mr. Hale," Patricia said, with a quiet precision that landed like a gavel, "please direct any communication to me or to the trustees. Thank you." He stopped. He looked at his attorney. His attorney looked at his notes. The room was very quiet. I thought, in that silence, about the night I sat in my car in the dark in 38-degree weather, about the squirrel in Maggie's garden, about the sound of Gerald Crane's voice on the phone saying $91 million, and about James, who had known me well enough to see what I couldn't see about myself, I did not feel anger. I didn't feel satisfaction either. Not yet. What I felt was something more fundamental, the particular peace of a person who has told the truth completely in the right place to people equipped to hear it. Gerald Crane thanked both parties. He informed us that the trustee board would deliberate and issue a written determination within 5 business days. He adjourned the meeting. I gathered my papers. I buttoned my coat. I walked out of the Whitfield and Crane conference room into the pale April sunlight, and Patricia fell into step beside me. "How are you feeling?" she asked. I considered the question honestly. "Finished," I said, in the good sense. She nodded once. It was enough. The written determination arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. Gerald Crane called me personally, which told me before he said a word that it was good news. "Mrs. Collins," he said, "the trustee board has reached unanimous determination. The evidentiary record submitted fully satisfies the conditions of James Whitfield's trust. You are the confirmed beneficiary of the estate. The transfer process will begin immediately." I was sitting at my desk at the hospital when he called. I thanked him. I hung up. I sat with my phone in my lap for 2 full minutes, doing nothing but breathing. $91 million. James's careful love, grown into something large enough to hold a life. The divorce proceedings moved differently after that. When Patricia filed the updated financial disclosure, including the full forensic report on the Delaware LLC, now formally entered into the divorce record, Derek's attorney requested a settlement conference within the week. The request had the quality of something not quite surrendering, but no longer pretending it could win. Virginia's equitable distribution framework yielded the following. I was awarded the marital home and a settlement of $480,000, representing my equitable share of joint marital assets. Patricia had argued for this number methodically, tied to specific documented contributions over 6 years. Derek's attorney did not push back meaningfully. They couldn't. The record was the record. Patricia had also submitted the forensic financial report to the Virginia Department of Taxation and the IRS Whistleblower Office. $2 million moved through a shell company over 4 years, not reported as income or disclosed as marital asset transfer, had tax implications that went well beyond the civil divorce. Within 6 weeks of the hearing, Derek received formal notice of a federal financial investigation. I did not take pleasure in this in any vindictive sense. I took note of it as the natural consequence of documented reality. Linda Hale's consequences were of a different nature, but no less real. The statements she had made about me, characterizing me as unstable, suggesting the paternity of my child was in question, had been documented by 3 separate individuals who provided written accounts to Patricia's office. Patricia filed a separate civil action. Linda settled within 3 weeks for a formal written retraction, published in the community newsletter she had originally distributed her claims through. Donna sent me a screenshot with a single message. They printed it. Justice has a sense of humor. By June, I had moved back into the Belmont house, my house by court order. I painted the living room a deep, warm green. I brought James's photograph out of the box where it had lived for 6 years and put it on the mantel. I set up a nursery in the room that had been Derek's home office, with its window facing the garden. The baby was due in October. I stood in the doorway of the nursery one evening in late June, looking at what I was building, and I thought, James would have liked this room. I believe that. I still do. My daughter was born on October 9th at 7:42 in the morning. She weighed 7 pounds, 4 ounces. She had James's forehead, broad and calm, the forehead of someone predisposed towards serious thought. Maggie was in the room. My mother was in the waiting area with a knitted blanket she'd been working on since February. Beth had driven from Roanoke again. I named her Clara James Collins. Clara because it means clear and luminous. James because I wanted her to carry the name of a man who had loved with intention, even across the border of death. With a portion of the estate, I made 3 decisions. I established a trust for Clara, paid off the mortgage, and donated to the Charlottesville Arts Center, the place where I had first met Derek. The site of the wound deserved some healing. Maggie was promoted in March. Rosa from prenatal yoga became a genuine friend. We traded Wednesday mornings. She took Clara so I could run. I took her daughter on Saturdays so she could sleep. Patricia sent a handwritten card when Clara was born. She comes from strong women. She'll know that. I kept it. As for the others, Derek's federal investigation concluded the following January. The assessed taxes, penalties, and legal fees represented a substantial and permanent diminishment of everything he had spent years carefully building. His business contracted. Clients quietly moved elsewhere. I learned of it in pieces through mutual acquaintances, the slow news of people who used to be your life and have become strangers. Linda's retraction was published in the same newsletter where her original claims had circulated. Her standing in the neighborhood association, cultivated for 30 years with the care of a head gardener, took a quiet, permanent hit. People did not stop speaking to her. They simply remembered. In a mid-sized southern city, memory is its own consequence. On a warm April evening, I sat on the back porch of the Belmont house with Clara sleeping in the monitor beside me. The garden was doing something tentative and optimistic. I thought about the night I drove to Maggie's in the dark with one bag and no coat. I thought about Derek holding the front door open in the cold. And I thought about James, who had seen, with a clarity I hadn't managed for myself, that I was worth protecting. Thank you, I thought, just to wherever thoughts go when there's no one left to hear them. Clara made a small sound in the monitor, not waking, just the language of a person dreaming. I stayed on the porch until the sun went down. Then I went inside. If I had to name what I learned, I would say this. The truth is slow, but it always arrives. Fear is not the opposite of courage. It is its precondition. The people who truly love you build protection around you even when you can't see it. And walking away from a small, offered safety to claim a larger, earned one, is not greed. It is wisdom. James knew who I was before I did. I've spent every day since trying to prove him right. Clara is my proof. What would you have done? Standing in the cold, 8 weeks pregnant, with everything taken and everything possible at the same time? Tell me in the comments. Subscribe if this story stayed with you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for being here.